Wow, I feel like I should just walk off the stage after that introduction. Thanks, Andy. So I'm here to talk about Etsy. Can you guys hear me? Mic? We'll do a mic test. Test. I'll use the, oh wait, it started working. Perfect. So this is my first trip to Portland since something that we did on April 1st, and I talked to a few people here that hadn't actually heard about this, so I wanted to bring it to your attention today. This is the news story that we ran on April 1st, and it didn't quite get the distribution I would like. Etsy acquires City of Portland. The funny thing is that inside the company, this almost didn't happen because people were saying, you know, for something to be funny, it has to be implausible, and this is too close to being plausible. So we argued about that for a while, and this is just a quote from the story. I'll let you guys read from me in the story. So, and it's every day it seems like it could have happened. Like literally 2 weeks ago, I got an email from a friend who I hadn't heard from in a while saying, when did you guys buy Portland? And I had to say, you know, look at the date on the story, which is April 1st, but it's entirely plausible. So anyway, you know, I'd like to thank the City of Portland for the synergy that we've had since April 1st as a joint venture. But I wanted to start off and talk about Etsy going back to when it started, and then talk about kind of where Etsy is headed and where the community is headed more importantly. This is actually the first item that ever sold on Etsy. June 20th, 2005, a little zippy pouch with a ribbon strap. And it sold 2 days after Etsy started. You know, this is more of traditional of what you think about Etsy, I think, handmade goods, bags and purses, that sort of thing. But I wanted to show you a few of my favorite things, some of which I've bought and some of which I haven't bought. The first one of which actually reflects the humor in the community that we saw with the April Fool's joke. This is one of my favorites. It's Abraham Lincoln riding a grizzly bear with an M16 holding a copy of the Gettysburg Address. Suitable for framing, et cetera, et cetera. This is, it may be a little hard to see in the back, this is a cross-stitch zombie Johnny Cash. And I have this at my desk at work. How many of you are Johnny Cash fans? Awesome. I thought that might be the case. Another one of my favorites, there's really, really great photography on Etsy. This is Larry and Gary. And this is from a photographer, Mary Haggerty, who runs a shop called Photo America. She's an award-winning photojournalist, has shot for the New York Times and other places. And she visited an event called Twins Day in Twinsville, Ohio, and that's where she met Larry and Gary, who I kind of want to get to come perform at Etsy at some point. So I had a really close family member who was married to someone who he probably should not have been married to. And I'm sure many of you have had this discussion in your families, and I know this is being videotaped, so it's probably going to get me in trouble. That moment when the person in your family finally decides to break up or get divorced from the person who's causing your family hell and your loved one hell is like such a great moment. And I'm proud to say that Etsy and the sellers on Etsy are there to celebrate it with you. So thank God you're finally divorced. I actually sent one of these, and cause for great celebration. I'm sure many of you have been in that situation. We have amazing bags on Etsy. This is similar to the bag that I have here, made by a German seller. Really great stuff. It's made out of a leather jacket, a navy kit bag, and a tent. This is a clock made out of a bicycle rim. I have one of these in my office. So when you look at these things, 5-10 years ago, how could you have ever gone on the internet and found these types of things on the internet? One that may be surprising, we actually have a seller, and we featured the seller before. The shop's name is Lemon Ball. You can actually buy handmade footballs on Etsy, and handmade baseballs and those sorts of things. Desks, couches. This is a couch that I have in my workspace at Etsy. It's a really beautiful couch. You can buy robots from people like David Lipson of Lipson Robotics. This one is actually on my desk too. It's made out of vintage car parts. I actually visited David in his workshop in Manhattan, and as I talked to him about what he does, it turns out that he was a cartoonist for Saturday Night Live. So if you've ever seen TV Funhouse, the ambiguously gay duo, that sort of thing, once you finish that type of work, you make robots. Christmas cards. This is the Christmas card that I sent to friends and family. So there was divorce cards in the mail, Christmas cards in the mail. A Happy Holidays card with a letterpress with the Brooklyn Bridge and snowflakes. Really amazing stuff. And then one I saw recently that I think really connects all the great things about Etsy and the community and all the advance of technology and making is this cutting board and 3D carving, the shop on Etsy. You can send them, if you have like a note card that your grandmother wrote her favorite recipe on, you can send it to them or send a scan to them and they will etch it into a cutting board. So this cutting board, the title of this recipe, they use an example is lime jello salad. So everyone's grandmother made stuff like that. So we're in a world now where you can literally get your grandmother's recipes, these pieces of paper that may get lost in history, and literally turn it into a family heirloom. So I hear from sellers all the time, and I get notes from people out of the blue just thanking me and thanking the Etsy team for building Etsy and thanking the community. This one's from Joel and Iris. They actually make wood iPod docks. You may have seen some of the wooden iPod docks on Etsy. And they wrote to me, the Etsy platform has enabled us to reach a huge market online that could never have been achieved otherwise. Thanks again for your contributions to Etsy and to the little guy. So we hear this a lot about Etsy making it possible for the little guy to sell things on the same footing as Amazon and Walmart and those, but better things, handmade things. And I think when people look to Etsy, they see that all these institutions around them are failing, and Etsy is an institution that they can trust. And I think that forces us to have a bigger responsibility, which I'm going to be talking about. You probably can't see this in the back, but this is a seller holding up that says, the first frame says true story, the second frame says Etsy, and the third says change my life, and the fourth says seriously. So Etsy changed my life. We hear this all the time. Etsy really changes people's lives. When we hear people talk about Etsy, they don't just talk about selling, they talk in the language of liberation, that Etsy has liberated them, and that's really exciting. Etsy gives them a sense of meaning and a sense of direction, a sense of self-determination. We hear about relationships a lot, the relationships that people make within the community. And we hear about the connection to the rest of the world from sellers. So Etsy isn't just purely a place to sell things, to sell funny things or sell interesting things that you've made. It's a place to connect to other people, and that's just as important as the commerce. So something that a lot of people don't know about who don't follow Etsy really closely is we have a concept called Etsy teams, and we have over 1,000 self-organized local teams around the world. And these are sellers who get together just to talk about selling on Etsy. They rent space together, they buy supplies together. They really cooperate and get things done together. So this is a team in Baltimore. Some of you may have met Matt, who's sitting in the middle. Matt's employee number 5 at Etsy and VP of marketing. So you'll see Matt sitting in the middle of lots of women a lot. We tease him about that. So Baltimore, Austin, there's Matt. It's a little like, he's like the Waldo of Etsy. We don't just paste him in, and he's not an expert photobomber. He just is always actually there. Singapore, there are teams in Singapore, Tokyo, again, all self-organizing around this platform. And of course, Portland. And I just wanted to note, to show you sort of the power of the community, on Friday night when I was putting the final touches on my presentation, I realized I didn't have a photo of the Portland team, PDX Etsy. So I tweeted to them and had a Twitter conversation with them about getting a photo. So that's where I got the photo from tweeting with the Etsy team. And I have to say the Portland Etsy team was a really strong supporter of the merger of Etsy and the city of Portland. So I was just talking with, as standing on the stage here, and was talking with Bree and others, and Bree said it feels like we're at the beginning of something, and I couldn't really agree more. And what I think what we're experiencing, you'll see the quote here from Sarah Horowitz in The Atlantic, is there's actually a quiet revolution happening around this sharing economy. And this economy that we're seeing is the economy of collaboration and getting things done together instead of competing with each other. Not to get too political here, but one of the things that I heard in the Democratic convention speeches from President Clinton, he described a new American dream economy driven by innovation and creativity, by education, and yes, by cooperation. I'm actually not depending too much on the government to deliver that because I think we're already delivering it, although I think it's a really compelling vision. So the way we've described it, this at Etsy is, we consider Etsy a people-powered economy of its own, contributing to a larger economy. And we think that the types of transactions that you see on Etsy, transactions by people who are already working together in teams, who are collectively building this economy, can really change the economy and make it what we're calling a people-powered economy. So, I mean, one of the interesting things that I think about a lot is, Etsy is a company, and I think when you look out on the internet, there are many companies that have failed or sold out, and people get really upset with companies. There are companies that provide APIs and then they close the APIs, and people are like, okay, this company's selling out. I'm not happy with this company anymore. So I think a lot about what do we do at Etsy to make sure that we're a company that doesn't sell out like other companies sell out. Because Etsy's a company, it's also a community, and it's a movement. So we have different responsibilities than we would as just a company. This image that you see is actually all the avatars of all the Etsy sellers in December of 2006. And so when I think about Etsy, I think about all of these people behind Etsy and all the people depending on us. And so how do we take this community-based business and make it a business that we can all be proud of, and make it Etsy, the business itself, a model for the businesses that we support on Etsy. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And when we talk about Etsy internally, we think Etsy can be a beacon for running a company that's profitable and sustainable as well. So I know we've heard the words profitable, and we've talked about making money a lot. I'm actually very proud that Etsy has made money every year since 2009. And we've made money because every sale on Etsy, Etsy gets a 3.5% cut, but the community, the person making the sale, actually gets 96.5%. And so I think in a world where you have these huge networks of people, if you can create a model where making money basically means that other people are making even more money, I think that's a completely defensible position, but also a very positive position. And so the number that we talk about inside Etsy, we call gross merchandise sales. These are the total sales in the community. And last year, $525 million in sales in the community. Again, 3.5% went to Etsy to fund our operations. 96.5% of those sales go to the community. So, how big is Etsy? When I talk about sort of growing and getting larger, there are about 800,000 active sellers on the platform. I mentioned the $525 million last year that was sold. Here in September, there already been, I think, about $540 million sold on Etsy this year, so it's going to be even more this year. 40 million visitors a month, and 150 countries where transactions happen. So I mentioned our size and scale again because I think as we grow, our responsibilities actually grow. And when I think about growing Etsy, I think about how do we increase our level of responsibility to the community that helped Etsy become where it has gotten to. So about a year ago, Andy mentioned I joined as CTO, and about a year ago in July, I became CEO. And we did a conference in September, just maybe 6 weeks into my tenure as CTO. called Hello Etsy, and we'd been planning for quite a while. And Hello Etsy was a gathering in Berlin put on by Etsy about the right ways to run business and to build local living economies. So I think education's always been really important in Etsy's culture, so we wanted to get together with other people who shared the same values that we do and talk about how do we build these businesses on Etsy. And I think I talked about gross merchandise sales, but we're really starting to, at Etsy, and I think in many companies here, organizations here, we're trying to figure out new ways of measuring success. So I think one of the most insightful quotes, we're not the first people to start thinking about this. Robert Kennedy gave a speech at the University of Kansas in 2008 in which he talked about gross national product. And I'll let you read it for a second. But basically what he said was, a measure like gross national product doesn't really truly measure what's special about the world. So even when we talk about the economy in the United States, if GDP grew 5% next quarter, would that necessarily make the United States better? I think people would feel better perhaps because they have money in their pockets, but it wouldn't necessarily make the United States like a happier country. So we need to think beyond that. So as we left this Hello Etsy conference, and I think this is sort of funny in a way. I mean, we've always had this image of how we wanted to run Etsy, but we had never really defined it. And so a year ago, we actually sat down. Etsy was 6 years old at this point, and we got a group of people together inside the company representing a lot of different teams, tenures in the company, and we spent about a month defining what our values are. And this is what we came up with after lots of debate and lots of discussion. And coming up with this is actually really, really difficult. How do you define values, especially in a 6-year-old company where everyone has sort of a vague idea what the values are, but you've never really committed to them? So we talked about what we wanted the company to be and how the company is, and these are the values we came up with. Mindful, transparent, humane business, planning and building for the long term, craftsmanship, fun being part of everything you do, and keeping it real always, which is a way of catching ourselves when we're not doing as we should. And I think the fun part is actually really important. Like before I moved to New York, I lived in Berkeley, and there was a lot of, I hope I don't insult anyone who's from Berkeley, but there was a lot of activism in Berkeley and a lot of belief in Berkeley, but it actually wasn't very fun. The number of times I got scowled at in the Berkeley Bowl because of something. So we think we can change the world, we can be passionate, we can be activists, but it doesn't have to be like the Berkeley Bowl. Which I love. The produce there is awesome. So it really becomes, I came from the engineering side, it really becomes a question of measurement. So we live in a world where, Exxon and BP and everyone says, like, we believe in the environment and all this stuff. So how do you measure that? I mean, if you were to watch a BP commercial on TV, you wouldn't even know that they got oil out of the ground. You would think that they grow birds and they fly in the sky and all that kind of stuff. So I think we live in a world where people are naturally cynical about these sorts of claims, like values and that sort of thing. So as an engineer, I wanted to really measure it and be able to stand behind it. So measurement's a problem, and there's no voltometer that you can plug in and say yes or no, but there is sort of. So in the search for trying to figure out how to really see how we were holding up to our values, I found the B Corporation movement. So how many people are familiar with B Corporations? So it's a pretty good number. So the B stands for benefit. And the idea of a benefit corporation is that businesses can and should be profitable, but also serve social good and create environmental impact, positive environmental impact. There's a nonprofit in New York called B Lab that basically has two purposes. They advocate for B Corp legislation, that is allowing for the formation of these corporations in states, which I'll talk about in a moment. And they also have a program, certified B Corporation program, where you go through and extensive third-party evaluation of your values and how you measure up to them, which I'll talk about in just a second. And you'll see here, this is a graphic that I took from their site. It's a trophy that instead of saying just best in the world, and we all want to be best in the world at what we do, they crossed out the N and said for. We want to, B Corp is about being best for the world, not just being best in the world. This is, I think, one of the most exciting things happening in business right now. You can see the map here. It looks a little bit like an electoral map now that I look at it, but the green states are states that have passed B Corp legislation, and I believe Louisiana has passed it as well. The red states, the legislation failed, and the yellow states, it's pending. But what, not to get sort of too wonky, but I'll have to get a little bit wonky. A traditional corporation, the bylaws say that the board of directors for a company have a fiduciary duty to increase value for the shareholders. So that leads to kind of an incentive to, sell your company at the highest price with all the other issues sort of set aside. And what a B Corp, the corporate form is, in your articles when you incorporate, you say, we're here to make a profit, but also represent the interests of other stakeholders in our business. So it's really important that this B Corp legislation pass in many states. Etsy is actually B Corp certified because it was originally incorporated in Delaware, but I'm actually working with the B Lab people and meeting with the Secretary of State at Delaware to talk about why they should pass the law. There's a lot we could talk about. If anyone wants to know about it, talk to me after the talk. But at the end of our assessment with B Lab, and you can go to bcorporation.net and find this questionnaire. It may be a little faint. They rate you on governance, workers, community, environment, and you get points. And Etsy, the minimum number of points that you can get to be certified B Corp is 80.0, and Etsy got 80.1. And so that sounds like, wow, we barely passed. But I think there are a couple of important points to make. We actually submitted ourselves to the process, and we got scored, and we actually figured out where we could do better. Getting back to our values about being mindful and transparent, we figured out where we could do better, and now we have a whole menu of things that we're working on to improve the score. So we think we're going to improve our score by 30 points or so. And this score here, you can go to bcorporation.net/Etsy, and you can read Etsy scores. So I would love to see every company have this scoring done, like any company can have it done. And in fact, I was doing an interview with a reporter, and a reporter said to me, oh my God, 80.0 is the minimum score, and you got 80.1. That seems pretty low. And my response to him was, what's your B Corp score? And he didn't ask the question anymore. So it's not something that we're trying to win. We're not trying to win a prize for it. We're just trying to set an example by looking inward and talking about our company. You can't quite see it on the screen, but one area where we scored pretty dismally was around diversity. So we got, I think, about 7% of the points on diversity. And I'm sure many of the companies here have that issue. But I wouldn't say that we're proud to represent that to the world, but I feel good that we're telling the world that we have this problem, and there's some things that we're doing about it, which I'll talk about in a second. So to give you an example of how I think businesses can be more transparent with their customers, every month we do something on Etsy called the weather report. So the reason I'm so comfortable giving you the gross merchandise sales for the company is that we actually publish those to the community every month. And this is an example. You can see the goods sold, how many items sold for the month, that sort of thing. So if you're part of the community, you can get a sense of how healthy the company is. As a side note, it helps venture capitalists figure out valuations and such, but that's another story. So I talked about diversity. When we got a not so good score in diversity, we actually knew it was going to happen. We were already having conversations inside the company about diversity and how do we improve our diversity score. So right around the time we became B Corp certified, we launched a program to provide scholarships for women to attend the Hacker School program, and we donated the space at Etsy. The really exciting thing, and Mark Hedlund, who, yes, thank you. So we had a lot of conversations about it, and Mark Hedlund, who's our head of engineering and product, who was here yesterday, many of you probably know, Mark came up with this idea of this Hacker School. Well, he didn't come up with the idea, but working with Hacker School. And we talked to the Hacker School people, and the prior Hacker School class that they had was like 90% men. And we didn't want to do something that was shallow and not really effective, because I think the lack of women in engineering is kind of a systemic problem, so we wanted to attack it in a systemic way. So Mark, again, and a team inside Etsy worked on this program, and we're really proud to say that the class that Etsy had was actually 50% women, 50% men, the one that we sponsored. So that's really exciting. And the crazy exciting thing about it is like the number of applicants we got. There were way more applicants from women to this program than there were for men, which was really exciting. So when I talk about using business to help change the world, like if you don't have to believe that these things are completely systemic and they can't be changed. You just have to use the power that you have, and I'm really proud that we did that at Etsy. We also have a lunch or twice a week, Tuesday and Thursday, that we call Eatsy. And Eatsy is a locally sourced meal. Everyone gets together. It's a really, really great thing. But as we scaled, we started generating more waste from this program. Not leftover food, because it seems like people eat all the food pretty much every time. But we started generating more waste, and it really bummed us out to see like these garbage cans full of like disposable plates and that sort of thing. So Jacob, who's one of our office ecologists, which is a really interesting job title that everyone should have, Jacob actually did some research and found a plate made out of some material called bagasse, B-A-G-A-S-S-E, that composts really quickly. And so we started using those, and Jacob would take the compost to a community farm every week or so. So you could see white text. What this says is every Friday, Etsy employees transport an average of 150 pounds of organic waste from our office to the Red Hook community farm. But the way we do it, I talked about our values earlier, and I talked about sort of the Berkeley thing and fun. The way we take our waste to the community farm is really fun. We do it by bike, a big orange bike and a big orange jumpsuit. And you see Ramin, one of our software engineers, who's an awesome JavaScript engineer, literally biking underneath the Golden Gate Bridge in this Dutch cargo bike. And we've got an Etsy flag on the bike, and we wave at people, and it's almost too cool to be true. So I mean, a world where people eat off compostable plates and ride their bikes through the streets of their communities and wave at people is a world that I can live in. I really like that. And you can see Jacob, who discovered this compostable material, literally like leaping over the soil. And I really believe that companies can do the right thing and also be really joyful places to work. Like doing the right thing doesn't have to be unpleasant. So again, I would encourage everyone to look at the B Corp model. It's really new. It's really just starting to develop, but it's something that everyone can participate in. And if your company goes through the B Corp process and you don't pass, you don't have to tell anyone. You can just go try again. So I think it's worthwhile. So we got the score here, and we're working on improving the score. We have a team now at Etsy, that social responsibility team, that's actually working on ways to increase the score. The last thing that we did that I think is really important is you get the score and you get certified as a B Corp, but the last thing that you need to do before you're certified as a B Corp or become a B Corp is you have to sign a declaration of interdependence. And I find this concept really interesting for this group, because when we talk about all the ways that people are finding new ways to make money and do things in the world that they want to do. We talk about independence a lot, but we don't talk about interdependence. And I think it's really, really important to recognize, and we see this at Etsy, that when you have a community-based business or anything based on a community, you're actually interdependent with that community. It's not just about the company or the community. They need each other. So I think we need to recognize that interdependence is really important. So when you really start thinking about yourself as being part of the world and serving the rest of the world and this interdependence, I think you have new obligations. So one of the things that was really exciting in the past year to me was the way I saw the internet stand up against SOPA and PIPA. I think it was one of the first times that the political power of the internet was exercised. And this was our block on Etsy. It was actually very controversial inside the company because people are doing business on Etsy. We were basically putting up a block in a marketplace. And I wasn't really sure how people would feel about it, but for the most part, people were really happy that we stood up for them. And it was really sort of an apolitical thing. I was actually I was in a private meeting with maybe 15 other people with a US senator after this happened. And we weren't allowed to sort of quote the meeting, but this senator said literally like, "Oh my God, we heard you, we're never doing that again." So that was really, really heartening. That was like a direct quote. So for me, this triggered something in me, and I started thinking, like, if we can stand up with SOPA and PIPA, we need to become much more active. And it just so happened a couple months ago, I got invited by Senator Chuck Schumer from New York to come speak to a group of senators. And I think first of all, it's sort of a weird thing to get invited to speak to senators at the Senate. Like, I didn't really talk about my past, but I was really inspired by Emily Martin talking yesterday about how the internet was a place where misfits could find a home. And my first job out of college was actually delivering pizza, right? So like, it's really amazing you can go from pizza delivery to internet CEO. How many of you delivered pizza? Yes. The most exciting job ever. So I was really excited to go to the Senate to represent Etsy, but also it was a demonstration to me, completely separate from me, that like this sort of new era of power was coming, that people were listening to internet companies. So I tweeted, of course, that I was going to the Senate, and I got a message from an Etsy seller that was really, really moving to me. And this seller told me to tell the senators to tell them that Etsy was an economic force in the world and that she was able to feed her family on 20 cents, which is a listing fee for Etsy per item, 20 cents plus her imagination. So I was actually able to take a tweet that I got on the way to the Senate from an Etsy seller and talk about what Etsy is and platforms like Etsy mean. And it was really amazing to me, these senators who were all like fidgeting while they were listening to like the CEOs of lead pipe companies and all this kind of stuff. They were really listening because Etsy was a really unique force. And so one of the things I said was what you see here. I wanted them to know that Etsy was not this nameless, faceless company, that the people on Etsy, the people selling on Etsy were an economic force. There were actually people from their communities, and I talked about the Etsy teams and that sort of thing, and how I believe that Etsy and the types of platforms that Etsy represents were really platforms for a brighter economic future, as you can see here. And as a side note, is anyone here from Louisiana? No one here is from Louisiana. Oh, that ruins my joke. Well, that makes it even better, because Senator Mary Landrieu came in late after I'd spoken and started railing on Etsy for not paying sales tax. And I told her that all of our sellers, all of the money goes back to the communities, including places like Louisiana. And she said, "Oh." It's pretty funny. So, we're here, we're talking about making and kind of the new economy and independence, and I brought in the concept of interdependence. And I started out with this April Fool's joke that almost didn't work because it was so plausible, about Etsy buying the city of Portland. And which makes it all the more interesting that a few weeks ago I got this tweet from Larry Morrissey, and you'll see his Twitter name is Mayor Morrissey. And Larry Morrissey is the mayor of Rockford, Illinois. Anyone from Rockford, Illinois? I'm doing that thing where I just call out places and people go, yeah. So Larry Morrissey, who I don't think actually read the Portland thing, says, since we need an Etsy economy, which I think is a really interesting way, this is without debate, since we need an Etsy economy. Has Etsy begun any partnerships with high schools or job training we'd love to explore? So I was like, wow, that's really, really cool. And before I could respond to him, Carrie McDonald, who the paper button on Twitter, tweeted back and said, ooh, I'd love to see where this leads. The Rockford Etsy team is willing to help. And so in closing, I really think when you look at these sorts of interactions, another world is possible. I mean, this is a sign from Occupy Wall Street. There was a phrase that was used in many of these things, many of the protest events. In a world where you can start this platform and people can buy and sell things all over the world, they can connect with each other all over the world. We can put out fake press releases about acquiring cities, and then mayors actually reach out to us to help them. And we bike our compost to a community farm. This is the kind of world I want to live in. This is the kind of world that we're building towards. And I really couldn't be any more optimistic. I mean, if you watch the news or read the newspaper, there's a lot of doom and gloom about the economy and things not going well. But I have more and more faith that the people in this room, platforms like Etsy, the people on Etsy, MakerBot, Kickstarter, all of these companies and organizations are going to make the world a much better place. Thank you.